the starting point of the bill in terms of this topic of targeted procurement is what we call the long title of the bill. Really, it tells us what's the purpose. It's the first bit of text under the title, the heading. And the Public Procurement Bill's title says it's to regulate public procurement, to prescribe a framework within which preferential procurement must be implemented. So the bill is very clear that its intention, and when Parliament passes it, Parliament's intention is to fulfill its mandate under section 2173 of the Constitution. So this is it. The bill explicitly tells us this is what this piece of legislation will be doing. It will be the national legislation that provides that framework for implementing section 2172 of the Constitution, right? So it's very clear. The second critically important point to bear in mind is the repeal section. So this bill proposes to amend and repeal a number of other statutes. And there's a whole long list in the schedule. The most important one for us to note is this one, because the bill tells us that it will repeal and thus replace the entire PPPFA. So this is important to bear in mind when we have this conversation. Once this bill becomes an act, the PPPFA will completely and utterly disappear. It will no longer exist. It will be a thing of the past. So this entire framework of 90-10, 80-20, preference points versus price points, all of that will be gone. It will no longer exist. So we are really starting with a clean slate in terms of targeted procurement going forward. The statute itself, the PPPFA itself, will disappear. This also means that the entire dispute in the agribusiness case will disappear. It will no longer be relevant. It will no longer be a live issue, because the case dealt purely with the powers granted in the PPPFA, in the statute. That statute will disappear. Of course, with the statute will also disappear the regulations, the 2022 Preferential Procurement Regulations. They will also disappear. They will just be gone, because the statute under which they've been made will be gone, right? So both the PPPFA and the Preferential Procurement Regulations will completely disappear. So when we engage on the Public Procurement Bill, we can safely just forget about the PPPFA and the Preferential Procurement Regulations 2022. And that's really important to remember, because we're not bringing any of that baggage into a new regime. We're really starting from scratch. Okay, so let's look at what this bill then does tell us about targeted or preferential procurement going forward. And it's really just a single section, even though it's called a chapter. It's chapter 4 of the bill. It's a single section, section 17, and it purports to start, at least, to give us the framework. It's not complete. I'll show in a minute why it's not complete, but it gives us an important first part of that framework that section 2173 is thinking, is contemplating, is requiring, really. So 17.1 then says, when implementing a procurement policy providing for categories of preference in the allocation of contracts and the protection or advancement of persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. So that's really a cut and paste from 2172. A procuring institution, and that's the word that's used for all entities covered by this bill, must do so in accordance with the objects of this Act, this chapter, and section 10.1b of the BE Act. So the bill firstly gives us the parameters within which implementation is to happen. Note importantly that 17.1 only talks about implementation. It does not talk about the creation. It only talks about implementation, right? So that's the first important signal. Then 2172 starts, 17, I keep saying 217 because they're so close together. 17.2 starts to give us some idea of the content of a new preferential regime. And it tells us that the policy envisaged in subsection 1, this is now basically the preferential procurement policy as we know it in current terminology, must include certain things, right? So it's mandatory. One or more preference point systems and thresholds. So we know that there must be a point system and there must be thresholds. So something along the lines that we've had up till now, but it doesn't have to be the same. But some preference point system and there must be thresholds as well. B, measures regarding preference for categories, a category or categories of persons or enterprises or a sector, goods that are produced in the Republic and services provided in the Republic. Right, so these must be there. Already you see where localization enters into the picture. And then C, measures, and this is the big one, to set aside the awarding of bids to promote any of the preferences referred to in paragraph B. So for the first time now, we will have a statutory basis for set-asides. This has been a big question in South African procurement law. This statute, this bill now answers that question by explicitly providing for set-asides. Note also that it's part of the mandatory content of a new preferential procurement policy. 2, to set subcontracting as a bid condition to promote any of the preferences referred to in paragraph B. 3, for subcontracting by suppliers awarded bids that promote any of the preferences in B. 4, to advance transformation, benefication, industrialization, innovation, creation of jobs, intensification of labor absorption and economic development. 5, to balance the economic impacts of imported goods or services unless the procuring institution is exempted, so an explicit exemption provided there. And 6, to advance a sustainable environment. These things must be there. Now, when you look at 2, you'll note that it's really a mix of substantive issues that must be included in the policy and mechanisms. So you find both mixed up into that section, or that subsection. Some of it tells us what are the kind of tools we need. Preferences and set-asides and subcontracting seems to be the main tools going forward. But then it also gives us a glimpse of some of the substantive content that at a minimum must be there. And we see categories of persons, enterprises, and sectors. And we see industrialization, local content, and we see labor absorption, and we see sustainable environment. Those are the main substantive issues that must be contained in this new policy. The section then goes on to give us further indications of how this policy is going to come about. And this again is very important in reference to the agribusiness dilemma under the Triple PFA, really trying to avoid a similar dilemma under this bill. And I think that's one of the main questions, at least in my mind. Is the bill clear enough to avoid a repeat of agribusiness? And this is really the question, who gets to decide? Who gets to say what this preference policy must be? 17.3 then says that regulations must be made regarding the applications of subsection 2A, B2, and B3. Now, curiously, not B1. So let me quickly jump back to B1. B1 is a category, measures regarding preference for a category or categories of persons or enterprise or a sector. That's the one that's left out. So to me, that's curious. It's curious that the minister is not obliged to make regulations in relation to 2B1. And then 17.3b, the minister may make regulations regarding any other provision in this chapter, right? So all the rest, the minister may. So 17.3 at least tells us that the minister may make regulations for the entire section, right? For everything covered here. And the minister then additionally must make regulations in relation to these few matters. Then 4 gives us a little bit more specific detail about who the beneficiaries must be, again, at a minimum. So without being exclusive, without being a closed list, it tells us that it must include preferences for citizens and permanent residents, for small enterprises, and for enterprises based in townships, rural and underdevelopment areas, or in a particular province or municipality. So very specific localization allowed there. And then 5 continues on this theme by defining the persons, the individuals that must be included, again, not limited, but must at least include Black people, women, people with disabilities, and youth. And then finally, subsections 6 and 7 provide us just with a little bit of mechanics for when the minister makes these regulations, that there's a certain procedure to be followed and that other ministers must also come into the picture. I think that's been one of the big challenges under the PPPFA, that there's been a little bit of tension at times between different line departments. This bill attempts to address that in subsection 6 and 7 by saying this is how mechanically the creation of these regulations will work. Okay, so that is it, right? So it's really, really interesting to see this regime. I think, to my mind, there are many questions. Firstly, as I've said, I remain skeptical about whether this is clear enough. I remain worried that there's still a little bit of uncertainty, very similar to what we've had under the PPPFA that resulted in agribusiness. It's not altogether clear to me whether the minister under this section can simply just prescribe this entire regime and that entities will just have to follow, or whether the regime that's put forward under the bill for preferential procurement continues to maintain some area of discretion for entities. I think it's captured in words such as implement in 17.1. It does not say explicitly that it's up to a procuring entity to create. So to me, there are many questions. It's also curious to me that this split between aspects that the minister must and may make regulations on. I'm not sure why. Why should the minister make regulations only on some aspects and not others? I can't quite see what the logic is behind leaving B1 and the whole of C out of that category, while you are still authorizing the minister to make regulations in any case. So there's a bit of a puzzle there to me, and I'll be quite interested to hear more thoughts.